Hey guys, it's Dr. Rosie, physical therapist, strength coach, founder of Alinea Performance, and the co-founder of the Alinea Collective. Today I want to talk about the second component of peace and love. So we're going to be talking about love, where peace and love, if you're unfamiliar with it, is the acronym that we use today for recovery from musculoskeletal injuries. So last week we did a video on peace, and if you need a link to that, go ahead and drop it in the comments below and we'll make sure to send that over to you. But love is going to be the component where we start to get more active in the recovery process. What's really cool is peace begins from immediate injury up to 72 hours. Now, love occurs from traditionally about 3 days, that 72-hour point, to 3 months. But it actually can go all the way up to 2 years depending on the type of injury. But we'll talk about that at another date. So if you've been following along, we're going to do a little recap. So the first thing with love is the L is going to be load. Load is so important, and I can't stress this enough, that we need to begin loading the tissue as soon as possible, roughly within that first 3 days. And the reason being is the inflammatory cascade goes through two processes. One, where it tries to take away bad tissue, and two, where it tries to build new tissue. We need to begin loading a tissue for a number of reasons, but primarily to send new tissue to help rebuild, as our bodies are really based off of the one principle of Wolff's Law. And if you're unfamiliar with Wolff's Law, it simply states that we adapt to the stresses placed upon it. So our bodies will then get stronger if we actually stress it. So we need to begin loading it. There's various ways to load the tissue, and you can range from anywhere from an isometric, a concentric load, to passively loading. There's so many ways, and there's a spectrum that you can go along that I won't get into here because this is such a very in-depth topic that we don't simply have enough time for. The second component is going to be the O, where O simply is optimism. The first thing I noticed as a physical therapist by treating a lot of these, a lot of clients, a lot of patients that come in, is especially with athletes that they've been working all season, they're trying to get better at their selective sport, and they end up getting an injury. And they start having a lot of negative thoughts, and they get really upset because of what they could have changed, what could have been different. But what we once knew about pain is very different than what we know today. And what I mean by that is we now know that pain is very closely correlated to our brain. And our brains actually have a lot of control with that. So we've also found that if we are more optimistic and we understand that yes, we will be able to get back to the things that we want to do with time, with proper loading, and the proper use of this whole acronym, peace and love, then we will get back to where we want to be. So remain more optimistic. Just know that you are going to get better, that things are going to turn around, and you may or may not have actually done something wrong. This is also a good time to also reflect on what changes you could have made. And often we find those changes are roughly related to the loading principle. Maybe you're doing too much, maybe you've been doing too little. So if you're not really sure, this is a good time to reach out or find a qualified professional, whether it be a strength coach, a therapist such as myself, or somebody else that you trust that can help you out through this process. The third component is going to be V. V is vascularization. So vascularization is another way of saying blood flow. So we want to increase blood flow, ideally to the target tissue. Now, if we go on that same principle that our bodies adapt to stresses placed upon them, inflammation, sending increased tissues there, etc., if we increase the blood flow, then we will get more proteins there, because within our blood we have plasma, and the plasma is simply the proteins that help us with repairing tissues. So we want to start to target that area with a low load cardiovascular to increase blood flow and circulation, which will help also excrete some of that waste product that we need to get out. Also, if you're unable to directly load the area in which is injured, then there's also a lot of research that has demonstrated that if you do cardiovascular training simply for increasing your heart rate, which will also increase endorphins, etc., mood, then that also can have a very positive effect with one, decreasing pain and increasing circulation, which will also help with your recovery process. Most notably, they found that with low back pain. With chronic low back pain, they found that one of the best ways to decrease some of that pain is get your heart rate up to 70 to 80% of your heart rate max for 3 to 4 times a week, work up to 20 to 30 minutes a day. Now, if you're unfamiliar with your heart rate max, you take the heart rate max, which would be 220, that's the max it can beat per minute, minus your age. So if you are 20 years old, then you would do 220 minus 20, which gets you to 200, and then you multiply that by 0.7 or 0.8, and then you find that range that you really want to stay within. So use that formula and know that you want to work at a cardiovascular level where you're keeping your heart rate within that range for the whole 20 to 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week. And we have seen a lot of positive results showing that it can actually help decrease your pain. But more importantly, it also helps with circulation, which helps a myriad of components in the body. Now, the fourth and final component really needs no introduction because it is exercise. Exercise has shown to be the most significant component of all of this, where exercise not only helps decrease pain, it gives us the sense that we have control again over our body, but also the essence of getting the physical tissue stronger and more adaptable to the stresses that we want to place upon it. There is a level that we really want to go through, and we want to start traditionally with exercises that do not stress the tissues greatly, and that's generally going to be with an isometric hold where the muscle or the tissue doesn't actually move, but it does stay contracted. And then we want to work in a mid-range of concentric, where ideally, if we can, we want to use some machines. And the reason we want to use machines is a lot of times machines put us in a more protected position, and we want to stay in a more of a mid-range. So, for example, if we're doing a bicep curl, if we are very irritable, then we want to stay closer within a smaller range. If we start to have less and less irritability, we want to then work on opening that full range up until we have the entire range available. Now, after that, we want to then start to work on some slow controlled eccentrics, which are going to be where the muscle is tight and contracted, but also lengthening at the same time. This is most notably used for tendinopathies and has significant effects and benefits to that process. Finally, we want to work into getting into plyometrics. This is so important because especially when looking at tendons, we find that people, when they end up having tendon ruptures or they have significant injuries to tendons, it's simply because the tendon was unable to absorb and be elastic for the response that was needed. For example, let's just say the Achilles tendon. If somebody has an Achilles rupture and they were jumping down from a box jump, a lot of times that quick stress that is placed on that tendon, the tendon is unable to withstand and absorb that load, therefore it then does rupture. So guys, if you need any feedback on this, if you need any recap, please don't hesitate to reach out. But note, the first 3 or after that 3 days, you really want to focus on love. Peace doesn't have as much of an effect because we want to start staying away from more of those passive things. We want to get you more actively involved. That doesn't mean that some passive things aren't useful, but just note that we want to be focusing on the active component. So from 3 days and virtually on, that we need to be focusing on this. All right, guys, have a good one.